for the last couple of days and really gotten to know him. He doesn't want a big introduction. I can tell you that he's a leading technologist at Ford Motor Company. He's got a great story about how he got that role. And he and I, talking, we discovered that we are pretty much neighbors. We live about 3 miles apart from each other. He's got 2 sets of twins, 8 and 6, so he's just happy to get out of the house. And he's going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then just like yesterday, we're going to open it up to questions. Same format here. I'll be here with a handheld mic. If you have a question, just come on up, and I'm sure he can answer it. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Mr. John Ellis.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry. Yeah, in Western culture, good afternoon is usually responded with good afternoon or hello. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm looking forward to sharing with you the story that Greg alluded to. But before I do, I have to give a call out to someone immensely special in my life. It's my bride. She's with us today. Because of her, I get to do the kinds of cool things I'm going to share with you for the next 30 minutes. So, Karen, thank you so very much for everything. As Greg talked about, we do have 2 sets of twins, 4 kids, 8 and 6, and they're a handful. And so I live in Chicago, and I commute to Dearborn 2 to 3 nights a week, which means I'm away, which means it falls greatly to her shoulders. So thank you very much. My name is John, and I do have a pretty cool story. And I do want to share with you a story about the car, transportation. The rules that were given to me were you have no PowerPoint. You're going to have audio that's going to have wind blowing over you. Last year was Billy Bean. This year is T-Boone, and now it's you. So I hope you bear with me as I try and paint for you a picture of some distant future with the idea of a connected vehicle in this transportation industry. I am reminded, though, that there is wind, so if you can't hear me, just throw your hand up, let me know. We will have a handheld mic that will come to me, because I do want you to hear the story. My story starts, actually, as a trained engineer. I went to Valparaiso University, electrical engineer and computer engineering. And I started working for a company called Motorola, where I learned about the use of software in embedded systems. For those of you who are old enough to remember, in the late 80s, early 80s, was the very first real use of software in embedded control systems. Sure, we had high-end stuff in the 60s and 70s, the space launch, stuff that was going on by big government, but for companies who were pushing product that customers were going to use, the 80s were the real sort of beginning renaissance of this embedded software. And I was pleased and happy and blessed to be a part of that as it goes through my story. At Motorola, I had some fantastic and fun things that I did, but the key for this particular session are 2. One was I was part of developer.motorola.com, which was the introduction of a third-party mobile development ecosystem to try and allow for people who weren't from Motorola, I do that all the time, not from Motorola, to build and add software to products that we built. You now know it as app stores, app economy, the idea of third-party apps. But back in 2003, 4, and 5, this was absolutely radically new. Motorola was at the forefront of making it happen, and I was blessed to be part of that team. I was also happy to be a part of a group that brought forward opensource.motorola.com. Opensource.motorola.com is a place where you would go to get open source that is in your software. For those of you who are software personnel, you understand that there's different models, different business models behind the creation and development of software. There's a whole arena called open source. And the idea postulated by Richard Stallman is that software should be free. Free as in beer, not free free as in democracy, as in be able to get it, but not free as in beer. You should be able to pay for it, but it should be free. I should be able to see source code. And so Motorola began, again, a renaissance to be able to use and leverage this incredible source of software. Things like Linux, Java, libraries, and bringing them together and packaging in some very cool hardware and delivering them to you, the users. To support that effort, we did opensource.motorola.com. Why is that important? It's important because not once during my 22 years while working at Motorola did I ever step foot in the automotive business unit. Not once did I ever contemplate, think about, or ever desire to work in the automotive business. When I speak publicly, I always start with guys and girls. I am not an auto guy. When I first started at Ford Motor Company within the last 13 months, I was driving a 12-year-old vehicle, brand not important, but it was not Ford. That vehicle hadn't been pimped, chipped, or modded in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that had ever changed on that vehicle were tires, gas, oil, filters, the standard. I didn't care. I start today by saying I'm not an auto guy. I still don't care. But what I do care about is software. So my tagline when I go in and see people is, I don't care how fast my car goes, but I do care how fast my software runs. I do care how cool my software is. I care how tight it is, how incredibly quality focused it is. I can't tell you much, if but anything, about our Ford vehicles, but I can tell you everything about software in our Ford vehicles. I'm not a car guy, but I work at a car company. And that's the theme as we go forward today for Ford. We are a software company. I'll talk more a little about that later. But as I said, I was asked to speak about the future, some distant future. What does the connected vehicle, what does this transportation economy look like, anchored by a connected car? Now, being an engineer, while I can work with ambiguity, I don't like ambiguity. So I said I'm going to set a date. So the theme for today, the date for today is 2031. What does the connected vehicle, what does connected transportation look like? What's the transportation economy look like in the year 2031? So those of you who are actually awake right now would say to yourself, why 2031, John? Why not 2025 or 2050 or 2030? Why 2031? Maybe we're going to go to the, yeah. Thanks. Testing. Back up. Okay. So why 2031? 2031 represents the 50th anniversary of the introduction of the modern-day ECU, or electronic control unit. Prior to 1981, there were no electronics in vehicles. Everything was done mechanically. Levers, switches, and other. For those of you who can remember, there were carburetors. And we would use things like switches and levers to mix and fix all of the fixture of gases, to figure out how to best get fuel through the engine. In 1981, the US government instituted the Clean Air Act, and there was just no possible way that we could actually accomplish what it needed without the help of, Greg, ready? Dynamically controlled, sensitive, modulating software. Thus began the modern ECU. And GM was the first to introduce it in 1981. While it's not exactly known how many lines of software were available at that time, it is postulated to be about 10,000 lines of code. Today in 2013, the Ford Taurus has 65 ECUs and approximately 10 million lines of code. Now, to put that all in comparison, the space shuttle that launched in the early 80s, built in the late 70s, had a total of 500,000 lines of software code. In the mid-90s, when the 777 was released, it had between 3 and 4 million lines of code. We are 2/3 of the way in my journey to 2031, and we are at about 10 million lines of code, 65 ECUs. We are expecting to see north of 100 ECUs in a car, not including other sensors and type, with well over 100 million lines of code. The car is going to be, or the vehicle is going to be, a highly smart, highly robust, inter-networked, connected thing. It's going to be self-aware, it's going to be consciously aware, and it's going to be environmentally aware. Now in 2031, there's some other things that are happening with the vehicle and software and sensors. The sensors that we're talking about are some very cool things. I'll give you a little preview that Ford's doing today and where we're looking at and why we're so bullish on the year 2031. Last year at CES, we introduced to the world something called the Smart Seat. It's the product of advanced engineering. It's way in the future. We don't actually have a date for it. But what it is it's a seat filled with sensors that can determine your posture, your weight, where you're seated, how you're seated, your respiration, your heart rate, pulse. In short, it knows who you are and what you're doing. Now, that may be interesting and it may not be, but here's the cool story. We're actually envisioning a world where the car who knows so much about you, the driver, to help empower Ford's vision of safety first. We can see a world where a driver has a conscious issue. He's drowsy, dizzy, has a heart attack, God forbid. loses control of the vehicle, is not able to continue to maintain the vehicle in a safe and operating manner. The seat knows this, and the seat instructs the vehicle to institute predetermined safety programs. Horns start beeping, lights start flashing, communications start occurring, the vehicle announcing that it's in a distress situation, all other vehicles be aware. The vehicle calls 911, asks for immediate dispatch and support, and then the vehicle starts to slowly slow down and pull itself off the road, ensuring the driver's safety and the safety of those around it. And we tell this story to people, and people say, wow, that's cool. How real is it? And everything I just told you is real today. It's not out in public. We don't have dates for it. But we have LiDAR and radar. We know when you're outside your lane. We know lane detection software. We have complete control over all the physical and mechanical elements inside your car. We can turn on and off at will all the different elements of your vehicle. We know how to start your car. We know how to stop your car. And so we are painting a vision where these become connected and the overarching message of safety becomes prevalent. And how does the car help you? That is the vision of 2031. Also that's happening in an arena of theme is 3D printing. 3D printing is the essence and concept of taking materials, carbon-based materials, and placing them atom by atom in a predetermined, orchestrated structure that you want, and in essence printing the item. For those of you who aren't following that great description, self-description, think about going to a museum, putting a coin in, and getting a thing getting a press of something. It's very similar to that. You get these items. And in 3D printing, we're envisioning a world where we're printing parts. We're printing things that today are physically manufactured. We're printing things that today can't be physically manufactured because the complexity and the desire for the efficiency use are just not achievable given today's manufacturing systems. Now, 3D printing is a physical thing, but just like paper printing, it's the result of software. And 3D printing can't be realized without the presence of software. And so we envision a world where you buy a recipe for a car, and you print your car. Now, people look at me, I've been talking about 3D printing since my days at Motorola in 2003, where we talked about the printing of phones, and people say, John, you're crazy. I can't envision the world of printing a car or printing a phone. And yet today, we're seeing wholesale foundation pieces from a car being printed with cement. We are printing foundations today. Yes, they are in laboratories at universities, but they are printing concrete. They're printing steel. Little story. Last year in July, August timeframe, Slashdot, for those of you who read the technology blog, wrote an article about 12 students and a professor advisor who built a car and raced it on a track in Belgium, sustained 145 kilometers for an hour. Now, that's a pretty cool story, students building cars, but it's been around for a while. What was unique about this story is that those students, the car they built was 98% 3D printed. They built the pieces, and then they configured them and put them together by hand. Now, for Ford Motor Company, we look at that and we're like, wow, that's cool. Because you see, Henry Ford didn't create the car. He didn't create the internal combustion engine. Henry Ford was named one of the men of the 20th century because of what he did do, which was he figured out how to make mass manufacturing economical. And in so doing, was able to introduce the idea of quality and be able to get cost controls and variance out of the system. And so, at the time that Henry Ford first started, it was 30 plus hours by hand to put together a car. And today at the Ford Rouge factory in Dearborn, it is 12 minutes start to finish to put that F-150 that you see in your conference room out the door. Start with nothing, end with the F-150, 12 minutes. So we're very interested in the idea of taking 3D printing and figuring out how we could do something with that, whether it's printing parts for repair, printing parts that are inline, or possibly printing your car. Now, why am I bullish on 3D printing? There is one data element I've learned over the last couple of weeks that actually just make this so incredibly sexy and interesting. For years, we, the humans, have been talking about going back to space and civilizing the moon. And there have been countless papers written about what it would take to launch all the necessary equipment to home and house humans on the moon. A couple months ago, a small firm in Holland won an ESA, European Space Agency grant. Their idea was to send a single 3D printer to the moon and build, using 3D printing technology, everything we would need. And so efforts are underway to understand the molecular makeup of the lunar rocks that we have, to understand if there's enough carbon that will allow us to do this. Early reports are there is. And so NASA is looking at colonization of the moon in a 25 to 40 year time frame. 25 to 40 years, ladies and gentlemen, puts me within a tolerance of 10% of my 2031 date. We're exceptionally bullish on the idea of 3D printing. So we have ECUs, proliferation of them. We have networks coming. We have the ability to 3D print. The third item, and I can't speak a whole lot to it, some of it's really confidential, is the business model. If you can have highly interconnected, highly smart, highly dynamic vehicles, both that talk to you, talk to your devices that come in, and talk to others, and we can 3D print in piece or in whole, the business model must change. So there's a couple different things that Ford's looking at and trying to stay in front of. One of them is the sharing economy. Proliferated by specifically California, but moving quickly in other parts of the world, we're seeing people saying, hey, I don't need to own the second most expensive item I would ever purchase in the world and only use 25% of the time in my entire life. Maybe I share it. And so if we're talking about sharing, and we're talking about ECUs, and we're talking about logistics, and we're talking about where things are, Ford suddenly says, holy mackerel. I'm not just building a car and selling it at a dealer. I'm building a car, I'm turning it on, I'm making it network aware, smart, dynamic. I'm doing partnerships with the likes of Telogis, and I'm putting it into this network fabric called the telecommunications and transportation economy. Because let's be quite frank and honest, that is the biggest mobile device we will know. We're not afraid of what the future holds, but we absolutely are very interested in what and how the business model plays out, because quite frankly and honestly, at the end of the day, the business model is going to probably be the largest issue we would have to face. Technology is happening whether we want to or not. It's the business model that we're going to have to adopt. Now, why am I bullish on 2031, and why did I agree to speak to this here today? Because there's some cool stuff happening today that helps put us on the path to 2031. And I'd like to end my remarks with that story. In 2007, Ford, recognizing the increase in bring-in devices, your MP3s, they weren't even iPod players then, but the bring-in devices, into a car, your phones, introduced something called Sync. Revolutionary technology to allow a driver to control the device that they brought into the vehicle hands-free. For the first time ever, you could speak to your car, call Karen at home, and it would. Play Lady Gaga, it would, sadly. For the first time ever, you had control of the third-party device that had no understanding of Ford, no predetermined a relationship between us and the manufacturers of those devices, and yet it worked. It just worked. And the world said, hey, we are taking notice, and competition started to flourish. In 2010, Ford, again, taking a look at the industry, said, holy cow, look at that, those devices, now they're smart. Now they got things called apps and content. And look at that. While we can control the device, we can turn it on, we can turn it off, we can make phone calls, the person can still touch the buttons and play Angry Birds, or touch the buttons to try and use Pandora. And we should fix that. And so we did. In 2010 at CES, we introduced the world to a concept called AppLink. AppLink is a collection of API software, APIs, that we wrapped our head unit in. What does that mean? It means we took software and wrapped things like volume control, buttons, menus, screen, voice-to-text, text-to-speech engines. And we published those APIs in a thing called a library, and we made third parties aware of it and said, hey, you can take your application, incorporate this library, and guess what? You can extend yourself into your vehicle And now I can use the power of the voice and the power of the vehicle to control that application. And in 2011, we launched the first ever voice-controlled Pandora application. You can, to this day, say thumbs up, thumbs down, fast forward, like, create channel, play genre. You can interact with Pandora and countless other applications simply with the power of your voice. And the world looked upon it, and competition flourished. And today there are no less than 19 different competitive technologies to do the same thing. A year and a half ago, Ford Motor Company called me after hearing me speak about open source and said, hey, we'd like you to come and do some technology stuff with us in this new arena called the connected services. We've been around for a while, but we're revitalizing, we're restarting ourselves. And we think the idea of software and everything that you've kind of been talking about publicly is now the right time to bring to Ford Motor Company. Are you interested? And so I did. That's my understanding that my hiring was somewhat contentious because, as I said before, I'm not an auto guy. I couldn't tell 2 cylinders versus 6 cylinders versus 8 cylinders. I don't know anything about the car, but I know about software. And so I joined February 1st of last year. And when I joined, I said to all those who were in the interview process, from the highest level, just one shore of Allen, down to our line level, I said, listen, I'm going to set some very aggressive challenges. I come from the consumer space. I come from the space where it's just software. Now, mind you, I can say that because I understand the implications of what that means, but you can never say that to me or I will be really ticked off. And in my world where it's just software, I'm not bound by certain rules that you are bound by. I don't need to be predicting and building something 4 years in the future because of supply chains and the fact that I got to go get my sourcing out of China to get it on a boat to pass through the straits to get to me so that I can take it, put it in a factory, and make sure that my F-150 gets through in 12 minutes. I'm not bound by that. And so I'm going to set some very aggressive goals, and I did. 2 of those goals were realized in the last 3 months. And this is a testament to how much Ford has adopted the stance that it's a software company. At CES this year, we stood on stage and for an hour we talked about Ford and never once talked about a vehicle. We never once talked about the word car. We didn't say car, vehicle, truck. We didn't say anything of those things. One thing we did talk about was software. And we made a commitment to the software community at large, and we said, we have been customer focused for 110 plus years, and today and moving forward we are now developer focused. And with that, we opened the automotive industry's first ever open third-party developer program at developer.ford.com. Our car is now open for developers to work on. A huge accomplishment. One that we were told would take forever to get done. But Ford gave me the latitude to hire the necessary folks, to leverage the necessary folks within the organization, and let it happen. At that same conference, we also said, hey, because we're now a software and developer-focused organization, we have a moral authority and we have an obligation to you to make your life easy. And so we gave a nod to the competition, the 19 different platforms that are out there, each with very little to no volume. And we recognize that there's a fabricated, non-high volume arena that the third-party developer was operating in, which for those of you that are in the development space recognize that that is absolutely a road to failure. One of 2 things happens. Either A, there is no application development, or B, we are paying for it, and we're paying very expensively for it, and it's one-offs. By definition, failures in this app economy day. And so Ford said, we recognize and acknowledge our obligation, and we're going to step up, and again, like in 2007 and 2010, we're going to fix it. And so we announced that we were contributing and making available all of the technology in source code form to AppLink, to the community at large. We followed that up with an announcement at Mobile World Congress where we actually outlined how that was going to work, where we were going to contribute, what was going to be made available, and what you could expect as developers. And on April 19th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, Ford Motor Company became the first automotive manufacturer to contribute in its whole entire form, the entire intellectual property, source code form of AppLink to the community. We then followed that up with a trip out to Barcelona where we met with others and we said, we're serious. We got a question. Someone said, well, what if BMW took it and just walked away with it? I'm like, that's okay. Because if they walk away with it, I'm going to follow them because they think they have a better idea. So I'm okay with that. I'm okay competing on ideas. And so Ford is a software company. The year 2031 is defined as a year of software enablement. I'm exceptionally bullish on Ford and software based on the behaviors to date. I have a couple other goals. I can't talk about them in big public forum, but needless to say, there's a couple of things happening this next year that we're exceptionally excited about. And they include additional relationships with our partner Telogis. So 2031 for Ford is a software-defined world where the connected car is the focal point of a transportation economy that is dynamic, that is rich, that is profitable for everyone. Ford's very bullish on our relationship with Telogis. We're very bullish on the space that we operate in. We're exceptionally excited to be a part of it. Now, for me personally, there's one question that I don't know yet. I don't know how to answer it yet. For those of you who follow science, computer science specifically, and sort of behavioral and philosophy sciences, 2031 is also the public date where Ray Kurzweil has said the singularity will occur. Now, before you get freaked out, the singularity is that point in time when the computational abilities that we create in silicon will exceed the computational capabilities we have in our brain. And so the singularity is identified as that point in time when we will have the capacity and capability to copy our brains and put them into silicon. And it's a very interesting space, and it's actually being exceptionally studied because we are on an unending, abounding pace in the creation of connected systems, which is what our brains are. And so what I don't know is, what does the world of 2031, where I've got a connected car powered by Telogis, finding stuff, making stuff happen, being profitable, and the car can be as smart and be smarter than me. I don't know what that means. But I'm exceptionally bullish by the fact that Ford Motor Company takes seriously David Kirkpatrick's statement of 2011 that it is a software company. It's a software company building incredible, cool software in exceptionally sexy, high-tech vehicles. And I'm exceptionally proud to call myself a Ford employee. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Very good. All right, and at this point, I think we're going to open up to questions. Again, if you have a question, just come on up here or raise your hand and I'll come to you since it's such a nice day. Anybody a question? I'm just very excited after John's talk. I'm very excited that I might be able to go to the moon before I'm 90 years old. That's pretty cool. Yeah, cross that off my bucket list.
Well, you know, with the Telogis high dynamic spatially located geolocational platform, that's just smart. You know, that's going to happen, man. I'm telling you, man.
But that's common knowledge.
As I said to Greg, I'm a teacher. I teach at the University of Notre Dame. So if you don't ask questions, I will ask questions. And trust me, you do not want my questions.
There you go. Well, we have one right here.
All right. Hey, Ralph.
Hey, John. I'll introduce myself just in case somebody doesn't know. Ralph Mason, I'm CTO at Telogis. And John and I have a little bit of backwards and forwards on some of this stuff. I was actually listening to your 3D printing thing. And I thought about it. You used inkjets, right? And what do?
They drop ink.
And lock up, right? I'm going to have a car with stripes down the side. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's going to work. But anyway, my question really relates to what you said to T-Boone yesterday. You talked about what you thought the chances of a non-industry related attack on an economy are. And so you paint a picture of 2031 where everything's connected, everything's online, everything's software. What are your thoughts there about how that opens up an infrastructure for, for diversion or attack from the inside?
So there's two answers for that. There's the marketing answer, and then there's the engineering answer. So from engineering, we're exceptionally concerned about it. We're aware of it. And so we are taking our time to make sure we understand it as we understand the interconnectivity side of it. Thus, it takes 4 to 5 years to roll out new software for a car. The marketing side is, no. It takes 4 to 5 years because we're trying to make sure that it's safe and high quality and highly reliable. There's something in between there. We don't know what the space is. One of the goals, and for those that are with Ford, you can please do check with them because I always like to make sure that people understand. Double check what I'm a Reaganite. I trust, but I verify. So double check everything I say. I go through my days at Ford talking about the fact that I know the automotive industry is unique, but I don't think it's as unique or the transportation industry is as unique as we think it might be. What I mean by that is as follows. We use the term automotive grade for software or for networks, and I can't find a definition of it, because automotive grade, as far as I can see, is a physical definition, one that is set in terms from ISO or IEEE or the SAE, and it talks about thermal and vibration and controls, and it talks about the physical environment, but it doesn't really apply to software. And so my statement to anyone who listens is, I think what people want is deterministic software, and if we think about that, and if we agree, deterministic software being software that does what it's supposed to do at the time it's supposed to do it in the time frame it's supposed to do it in, then there's a wide open space of deterministic verticals. They include the medical industry, the avionics industry, the military industry, and others. And so if we can look at that, then we have a broad concern about the types of security that I was referencing with T-Boone yesterday. And so we are exceptionally concerned. There is a motive, for those of you who are not in the networking space, and Ralph will appreciate this, there's a statement by a very, very smart guy that said, if you don't want to get hacked, don't connect. So we're trying to figure out the equation that sets the balance between not getting hacked or being able to control getting hacked versus the productivity and efficiency that is achieved by being connected. And there's this equation. How much do we put in? How much do we control? There's lots of different work going on. Some of it's science fiction, some of it's future. But the world of 2031 has some extensive issues with respect to security that aren't just about the automotive industry. They're about just connected industries in general.
Great, thank you. And I know what automotive software is. It's expensive.
Yeah, automotive software is software that runs on an auto, right, Ralph?
Question here, John.
Thank you. John Muscatelli with AT&T. So, with respect to yesterday, will you be selling Fords at 7-Elevens? I'm sorry. No,
if you can print them.
Yeah. No, my question really is, what do you think the auto manufacturer's role should be or obligation should be regarding driving while distracted with all of the technology in the vehicle?
That's a great question. It's one that I struggle with, and I'm upfront about it with the management team at Ford, because I'm not an auto guy. So I come from a world of software and consumer devices, and I come from a world of personal choice, and sort of if you choose to put something on your phone, then you've made that choice. And I have grown to appreciate and understand that while valid, that mindset isn't applicable when you're manufacturing a device and an object that can travel at over 100 miles an hour and becomes potentially dangerous if not used correctly. And so what is the obligation? The way we're addressing it at Ford is it's threefold. We have an obligation to teach, and the teaching itself is broken up into three. We have an obligation to teach our drivers how to use the vehicle and how to use the vehicle while interacting with other vehicles on the road. We have an obligation to teach dealers and the infrastructure behind the sales of vehicles to explain to people what goes on. And we have an obligation to teach the regulators about what is and isn't doable with vehicles and how we need to take and understand that integration. So that's teaching. Number two is we have an obligation to create the systems that work, that just work, that make it easy, that you can use the system in a way that is intuitive and doesn't cause you to lose sight of the fact that you are driving. Sync is an example of that. The most simple interface known to mankind, voice. We don't have to teach anyone voice. We have to teach you how to use your voice in a new way, but we don't have to teach you how to speak. And then the third one is the advancement of technology that propels us along the path of allowing for a much more